Hello and welcome back to the show. Now, is 5G really as grim and as nasty as everybody makes out? I've had an email from one of my viewers who says, actually, I'd like to challenge some of the points that you've been making. And I think it's quite good to have a balanced show because obviously I have a lot of guests. They come in with their points and they say their things. And some people say, actually, that may not be accurate. I'm not calling them liars. It's just maybe some of the stuff that they're saying isn't quite the same. So I thought it's very fair to air an alternative view. After all, it's nice to be a bit balanced, otherwise we're just taking the first thing that comes to us as read, like when the government tells us of something and we just go, oh, okay, that must be true then because the government told us. So we'll get into that in a second. It's all about 5G. Is it really as bad? Is it going to radiate our brains? Let's find out. But first, I've just been asked to remind you by somebody else who's booked me to do some talking that coming up soon in May, on the 26th of May 2024, the AV14, the Alternative View Conference, Riding the Wave, it's called, is on. And I'm there, as you can see. I'm one of the guest speakers. There's a number of other speakers. It's a lovely conference, apparently. I've never been there before, by the way, but I've been asked to be there. We've got things from this bloke here, this baldy chap's talking from saving our heritage to saving the planet. Not quite sure what he's going to talk about yet. Preparing for a new landscape. We've got Invisible Sky, how climate engineering is hacking humanity. A journey through the duat. I'm not sure what a duat is, but I'll be interested to find out. And many more other speakers, as you can tell. So you can book your tickets for the Alternative View. I believe it's in Glastonbury. And look at that lovely looking venue there. Anyway, there we go. I'll put the link in the description. You can check that out and it will be absolutely hunky-dory. So let's get back onto this 5G thing, the pushback. Is 5G really as grim and as nasty as everybody is telling us on the YouTube channels and things and the guests that I have on my show? This is an email from a chap called Peter. We'll just call him Peter. And he says the following, and let's read it together. He says, "Hello, I've just been watching your interesting discussion." And of course, we've had many interesting discussions, so I'm not sure exactly which one, but it'll probably be the most recent one. And he says, the 3 UK topic could be explained by an error of adding limited to the 3 UK, particularly as 3 UK is part of the CK Hutchinson's Holding Limited, or Holdings Limited. And he gives us a link to go and have a look at, and actually I can do that here, and this is the 3, and I'll leave these links in the description. So what is going on about there, just for some clarity to you and I, is that on Companies House, the company that was apparently putting forward these plans for 5G masts, or was being given the authority, that's in the contracts, as I understand, as I remember the discussion, is that they're not registered on Companies House, or they're on Companies House as dissolved companies. So this 3 UK is a dissolved company that no longer exists. And yet it's on the contracts with the councils who giving them permission to put up the towers. And so Peter, my correspondent here, is saying, but surely that's what it is. But I think we'd proved that is what they've been doing, is that these limited companies are not quite that. However, I'm offering his opinion as a pushback. So it'll be interesting to see what other people make of that. So anyway, he says that clearly all documentation should be correct. Well, it should be, but it doesn't seem to be the case. And people like Ian Jarvis has gone into this research quite heavily. It's not just sort of picked it out and gone, oh, there's a limited missing. He says, but is that too simple? Well, it does seem to be too simple. Anyway, there's more. He goes on and says, note, hundreds of square miles is not actually far. And that refers to the fact that there are these poles which are broadcasting this 5G signal hundreds of miles. He says a 10-mile radius is 314 square miles. The statement about metal being... Okay, so that's if you have a 10-mile radius, it can make up 314 square miles, which, okay, but that's still a lot of space, isn't it? And if you happen to be in that space and it's radiating, I would have said that was quite a worrying thing. He next goes on to talk about metal, and the thing about the metal is apparently the radiation from 5G is it's not safe, and even in I forget their own guidelines for it, that if you have any metal on you, that is excluded. But people, I seem to remember them saying that, very few people would have this situation, but loads of people have fillings. As we mentioned, people wear watches, they have glasses with metal bits in it. That catches the radiation and can affect you, as far as I remember in the conversation. But I'm really just here to put the pushback against it and see what you think. So he says the statement about metal being affected is no different for all transmissions. It's worth noting that the power levels of analog TV transmitters were in kilowatts with ranges up to 100 miles. But I think the point about the 5G is, unlike television, which is on a longer wave, so these are more benign waves, the 5G, the wavelength and the power that's being pushed these wavelengths out is much smaller. So the radiation is faster and more abrupt, if you like, than the sort of much gentler waves that we've had from television: long wave, medium wave, and short wave. These are millimeter waves. Now, I do remember my dad used to manufacture aerials for a living. That was his thing. And I've said this in videos in the past. As a young man, I helped him do these things. And it wasn't just television. He used to do all sorts of communication radio waves. And he would sit there in front of an oscilloscope, and he would show me how the waves worked and the size of the waves, and his dipoles, his aerials, would have to conform to the certain band, the frequency that he was making them for. And he made stuff, covert aerials for the police, he made direction finding aerials for ships, and he also made direction finding aerials for wildlife. If you were in the jungle, for example, and you wanted to track, I don't know, wildebeest or something, or kangaroos dancing about in the Australian desert, he designed aerials that you could use to do that, and each one had a different bandwidth depending on what we were transmitting. So, and he told me when microwaves came in, they are so tiny, they are so powerful, and they are dangerous, which is where I suppose I've got my slight worry about it. And that's what 5G is. It's this very tiny wave, unlike the analog TV transmitters. So I'm not sure we're talking the same thing here, Peter, but you may have some points. So the mention, he says, of the lack of insurance for 5G is interesting. Right. And that point, of course, is the point that if you've got a 5G tower, or even the smart meters inside your house, that's radiating, who's ensuring that you don't get damaged? That was the point that we were making in the show. And he says the lack of insurance for 5G is interesting. This applies to all radio transmitters for the last 100 years, like broadcast TV and radio, point-to-point links, satellite use. Presumably, because it would be near impossible to prove which transmission among the multitude around us was a particular problem. That's why you can't get any insurance, because we're in a swamp of radiation. He says, note that what's important with cellular systems is that the signal has to be of a low enough level that does not extend to other cells using the same frequency. And I suppose what you mean by that is that everybody who's got a mobile phone going at that frequency, if it's too much, you'll get cross-channel interference, or you'll get a bleed through that you used to get. I think the problem, and I'm no expert in this, and I'm just trying to interpret, and I'll be interested in those people who are interested in the dangers of 5G, is I think that because these transmissions are so different at such a higher level on the bandwidth. You've got ordinary transmissions. You say about 100 years of ordinary radio stuff. If you're down this neck of the woods and all your transmissions and your radio waves are down here, much more benign, bigger, less aggressive, but the 5G is right at this end, which is much more what's the word, pernicious, I don't know. It's more aggressive, it's more potentially dangerous, because these waves are like the microwave in your microwave oven, and which has a Faraday cage around it to protect you, whereas these others don't. And as you say, yes, so if people are suddenly being damaged, I suppose you could put it this way. We've had 100 years of TV broadcasts and FM broadcasts, and people haven't been damaged, or if they have, we've not seen it. But if you switch the 5G on and suddenly people have got massive headaches, as they claim they do get, or you've got people getting cancers and all those sort of problems, and it all suddenly starts from the time you switch the 5G on, it suddenly becomes bleeding obvious that it isn't the 100 years of TV signals going, that it is actually the 5G ones. So if that happened, who then is liable, and where is the liability insurance? I think that is the issue, and it doesn't seem that these companies have or want to take the liability. So I think that's a legitimate worry, but we'll see what others say. Carrying on with this email, it was said the difference between 5G and other transmissions is beam forming. 4G uses beam forming. It's just a means of transmitting in a particular direction. This means, for example, that instead of transmitting across 120 degrees area, the beam is reduced to 12 degrees. In other words, instead of like a light bulb, light shines, you've got a light bulb and the light shines out all over the blooming place. It's just like a laser. It shines in one direction. But again, it comes to the fact that 4G and 5G are totally different technologies, effectively, because the 5G is this high-powered microwave instead of the 4G, which is a more, not so good, but more benign than the 5G. That's my understanding. I'm not an expert in any of this, but I'm just trying to sort of lay what I understand, but we'll get more people to comment on this. It would be fascinating. So I hope this isn't too technical for all the other viewers. So in other words, he's talking about this beam. This means that 90% reduction in transmission power because you're only beaming like a laser rather than like a light bulb, and not covering the 90% area that doesn't need to receive the signal. Okay. In a way, same as our TV aerials are made directional with many bars to increase the gain to receive the signal. If you look at TV aerials, they sort of had this, it's called a Yagi. My dad used to, he didn't make TV aerials, but we knew about that. He used to explain it to me. They were Yagis. And they're directional so that you just have to point it in one direction, and you didn't need a lot of power, therefore, to pump the signal out or to receive it, or all of this sort of stuff. So I understand all of that. And he goes on and says, also note that 3G frequencies are being turned off, which is a shame because 3G is a much more, as I say, a much more benign one. Typically 700 megahertz and being reused for 5G, but it can't be the same as 3G. I mean, this is the bit I don't understand. It can't be 700 megahertz because 5G is these microwaves, which is a much higher megahertz as far as I understand. Any issues now would have already existed. Well, we don't know what really the effect of the 3G, 4G have already had on people. We're waiting for people to sort of, 20, 30 years down the line. Maybe some of the problems that we've got is already connected to that, but we just haven't associated it with it. He said it would help if people provide details of specific differences between 4G and 5G. I agree with that. It would be good to see, absolutely. But I do think in some of the productions we've done that. And if there are issues with 5G, then surely they would have been the same with 4G. These are all legitimate questions, but I'm not sure that you fully understand the difference. And I'm not saying I fully understand the difference between 4G and 5G. It's just 5G is a much more advanced, and it's millimeter-sized signals, which have a much more devastating effect, as I understand it. Finally, then, he says, it's not clear what some people are trying to achieve in detail. Is it the closing of mobile comms, including emergency services, plus all TV and radio broadcasts? No, I don't think it's that at all. As you said, we've got hundreds of years of TV and stuff. I don't think people are trying to trying to close that down. I think that's a ridiculous argument. Mention of 47 million milliwatts, 47K, where the safety information for working near all radio stations is the same, hence the signage. Until 2012, Peter says, the Crystal Palace TV transmitter had four 100 kilowatt transmitters, effective radiated power, and now has 6 200 kilowatt ones. This might all be quite technical for people to understand. On frequencies around 500 megahertz. Ofcom publish regular measurements for several sites. Have these been looked at? Hopes this helps. Are the discussions about streetlights still going on? So it's a pushback against the 5G. I don't know whether Peter fully understands the problem with 5G or whether I have misunderstood Peter's pushback against the problems with 5G. But clearly, to a lot of people, it's a complicated issue. From my point of view, is we have something that works with, say, 4G. We're already somewhat worried that something like 12 years ago, people were talking about the radiation that you get from these mobile phones when you put them up to your head, and people are getting problems with that. And it was advised that kids did not get these because their skulls have not been formed. They're much more open to being attacked by it. We know that radiation isn't very good for us. Why would it be? And we're seeing all sorts of problems with that. A lot of people are sensitive to it. To add more, just simply to add more and slightly higher powered signals into the atmosphere already does not seem to be a very sensible thing, in my humble opinion. But I'd be interested in your thoughts, all that. Does Peter have a point? Are we worrying about nothing? Has it already been resolved and we're all okay? Or is this sort of a smokescreen? And should we be a lot more worried about this technology? And is there another use for this 5G, maybe connected to the medical interventions that people have had, that people do talk about? Be interested in your thoughts. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with more, hopefully less confusing videos soon.